The observation chamber felt dead quiet, except for the steady hum of the containment fields and the soft ticking from the monitoring lights. Dr. Kira Walsh pressed close to the reinforced glass, her breath leaving a small patch of fog as she stared inside. Right in the middle of the sterile habitat sat the Thresk cub. He was small, even for his kind, still just a kid, but everyone in the coalition knew what he was. Thresk were the monsters people whispered about across known space, born hunters from a brutal, high-gravity world. They had strength, speed, discipline enough to smash armies. Even their kids could kill you. This one, Vector, they called him, had claws sharp enough to rip through armor. Instincts trained for war before he even learned words, and yet he just sat there, completely still, not sleeping, not really resting. Just stopped. 9 days he hadn't moved, not even a twitched, just the barest rise and fall of his chest. From a distance, he looked like a monster waiting to pounce. Up close, though, it was something else. His scales had gone dull, crest flattened. He looked like he was shutting down, piece by piece. He wasn't getting ready to kill, he was giving up. Kira watched his shallow breaths and could feel the truth pressing down on her. He didn't have much time left. The Thresk didn't believe in mercy. They believed in honor, strength, and dying for a reason. From the moment they were born, their young learned that surviving only mattered if you followed the code. Cowardice was worse than dying out. Surrender. That was the deepest shame a family could carry. Vector survived an attack that wiped out his whole diplomatic ship. Warriors, elders, his parents, all gone. He lived because his father surrendered just long enough to hide him and buy a few seconds. Humans would call that love. The Thresk called it unforgivable. The clans were through with a ritual severance. On paper, Vector was already dead. Just a body, no place to belong. Coalition officials told Kira to keep her distance. The Xenobiology Council warned her that messing around could start an interspecies war. The Thresk observers, they didn't mince words. If the cub survived, with humans it'd be an insult. If he died, well, that was just how things went. And if Kira tried to pull him back from the edge, she could lose more than her job. She could lose her life. By looking through the glass at that unmoving child, Kira saw the real cost. Saving him meant standing against everything his people believed. Letting him die meant agreeing that a child should die for being loved. Kira didn't bother asking for permission again. She already knew what they'd say. Instead, she requested clearance and waited out the hours in the observation chamber, watching the lights fade into artificial night. When the habitat door finally slid open, the sound echoed in the quiet. The Thresk cub didn't even flinch. No threat posture, no reaction. That scared the guards more than any show of teeth. Kira walked in and sat on the floor a few meters away, hands visible, body low. She didn't talk at first. She knew what silence felt like. She'd lived inside it herself. Minutes stretched out. Hours, maybe. Vector didn't move, eyes unfocused, breathing so shallow it barely counted. Then, soft, without looking right at him, Kira spoke. She told him about her daughter, 7 years old. The shuttle that never showed. The lab report that kept her. Late that day, her voice stayed steady. It had been like this for years. She spoke the words the way you do when you've said them to empty rooms 100 times. People told her it wasn't her fault, that she should move on, that time heals everything. She said they were wrong. Humans don't move on. We just learn to carry what we lose. For the first time in days, Vector's inner eyelid flickered. Just once, Kira opened a small wooden box and set it on the floor. Inside was a faded bracelet, woven by a child's hands. She told him she wore it every day, not because it hurt, but because it mattered. Vector's claws scraped quietly against the floor. He was listening. She kept going, voice even and human, told him what the Thresk said about his father. That surrender was weakness. That survival was shame. That he should have died. Vector's breathing hitched, sped up, uneven, and then she said it, the thing no one else would. Your father chose you if you picked your life over his honor. He chose love over every rule he'd ever learned. That doesn't make him weak. That makes him a parent. Vector made a sharp, broken sound, a click that set the monitors jumping. His stillness shattered. He folded in on himself, scales rippling in deep purples and blues, colors nobody saw, not really. Signals of grief so raw they barely left a trace anywhere. Kira stayed back. She could hit some hurts, just need space. When the noise finally faded, she broke the silence. Your people say you should be dead, but you're not. You're here. You're breathing. That's what matters. After that, Kira turned everything upside down. She showed Vector how humans mourn, not with big shows of glory or shame, but by remembering. They built a memory wall together. Photos of his family. Stories. Laughter. Lessons passed down, tucked between scraps of loss. It wasn't about building shrines for grief, but celebrating the lives that had shaped him. The Thresk observers, hung back and muttered about weakness. Kira just called it healing. She brought books. She sat across from him at meals. She showed him how you can carry pain and still keep moving. Little by little, something shifted. Almost hard to believe, but Vector started to come back to life. Months went by, and the difference was impossible to miss. He stopped sitting at the center of his habitat and started pacing the edges. He talked more, his voice rough and searching. He remembered his father's advice, his mother's laughter, the way his clan gathered before a hunt. He began eating on his own. He slept lighter, without that heavy, hopeless stillness. Every evening he stood before the memory wall and said their names. No old Thresk chants, just simple, honest words. He talked about joy, about failure, fear, pride. He let sorrow and love sit side by side. Other children started to notice orphans from other species, a hatchling without her nest, a bird child who missed home. They didn't share a language, but they all knew loss. They stood beside Vecna just listening, holding the silence with him. When the Thresk clan leader finally showed up, the air turned sharp and cold. Judgment hung over everything. He watched as Vector comforted a trembling child, teaching her the same slow, steady breathing Kira had shown him. "This isn't our way," the leader said. Kira didn't even blink. "Maybe not, but it's what he needs." The leader stared at Vector for a long time. "You've made him weak," he said, but there was doubt there. Kira kept her voice steady. "No, I made him whole. There's a difference." Years went by, and Vector grew tall and strong. Every bit the warrior the Thresk respected. He honored the hunt, he kept the old codes, but he carried something new, too. He learned that strength wasn't about standing alone. Sometimes survival meant letting others in. He became a bridge between species, trusted in places where no one else was. And he kept one human tradition, a wooden box, filled with tokens of memory, always out in the open. Proof that the dead shape the living. That carrying love isn't weakness, it's strength, carried the right way. Long after the reports were filed and the arguments faded, people still told the story of the Thresk cub who wouldn't just lie down and die. Not because he won every battle. Not because he proved anyone wrong with force. Because he survived without shutting himself off. Vector learned you don't have to hide your grief to live with it. That memory doesn't drain you, it shapes you. The humans always said the dead don't need our loyalty. The living do. Vector carried that lesson, not as a wound, not as a burden, but as proof that love, once given, doesn't vanish. It just changes shape. If you carry it right, it becomes something stronger than honor. Decades passed. The coalition changed in ways nobody saw coming. Treaties rewritten, protocols softened, doctrines overhauled. And right in the middle of all that stood Vector, no longer the silent cub waiting for the end. Now a towering Thresk, scarred and lined with age. People didn't remember his victories, but the way he could quiet a room. When arguments turned into shouting matches, he stayed. When grief started to turn into bitterness, he listened. Warriors trusted him because he understood honor. Mourners trusted him because he understood loss. He never told anyone to forget who they were. He just showed them how to carry it, without letting it crush them. In his private quarters, far from the eyes of the clans and councils, the memory wall still stood. It grew with him as the years passed. New faces joined the old friends lost in service. Children he'd helped through pain who'd found their own way. But, always, at the center, was his family. His father's steady look, his mother's fierce smile. Every night, he spoke their names. No speeches, just remembrance. Some nights, young ones from all over would sit with him, tangled up in their own feelings, scared they were weak. Vector never rushed them. He told them what to age. He passed on something someone once told him, a simple truth. Pain doesn't mean you're broken. It means you loved. And love, if you keep it close, doesn't just vanish. It sticks around. It teaches you. Dr. Kira Walsh lived long enough to see what the cub grew into. She moved a little slower now, her hair streaked with silver. Whenever she visited, Vector would sit with her. He was gentle, careful not to overwhelm her with his strength, and he never filled the room with words, just for the sake of it. They didn't talk much about what came before. Honestly, they didn't have to. Then, one evening, as the lights in the station faded to that soft blue, Kira put a wooden box on the table. It was an old thing, familiar in her hands. Inside her daughter's bracelet. Vector quietly set down his own keepsakes next to it. 2 lives marked by loss, 2 different roads that somehow met in that quiet moment. Kira smiled and told him she was proud. Vector just bowed his head, nodded some formal gesture, but something deeply human. Gratitude. When Kira died, there was no big ceremony, no grand speeches or polished words. Vector stood by the memory wall and added her name, not as a savior, not as a hero, as family. The tradition kept going. People gathered. They spoke the names, they told the stories. And in that mix of species and cultures, something gentle held on. A small truth, born ages ago in a cold room behind thick glass. Surviving isn't shameful. Loving isn't weakness. Remembering well, that's not a burden. It's a duty. And when they carried it together, it made them all a little stronger.